I'm a native North Carolinian, and people at home, where I have not lived since I was 18, still recognize me when I open my mouth. That's a boundary. That's a dialect. That's a southern drawl, right? So I moved to Atlanta in 1989, and we had already almost begun the process of building the boundaries that would maintain order during the 1996 Olympics. We took our Interstate 285 perimeter highway from 4 lanes in each direction to 7 in each direction without widening the road. Those are important boundaries to be aware of, right? Boundaries in life, some are negotiable, some are non-negotiable, and in the middle, there's a tolerance zone. What do you think? Name a non-negotiable boundary in your life. You don't have to say it out loud, but think about it. A non-negotiable boundary in your life. For that non-negotiable boundary, that's one in which you know you will keep it clear. It'll be a guide, a North Star for your interactions and your scheduling, your traveling, your words. Right? But sometimes in the tolerance zone, you can manipulate that. You might say, well, normally I take Saturday as my Sabbath, but I would be willing to do sometimes, right? So here's a question for you. If our boundaries are not always absolute, then how are we supposed to engage in ministry? If we don't have a list, like in my family, in the Melton family, we live by 11 commandments. So you know what the first 10 are, but what is number 11? What is the 11th commandment in the Melton family? It's emblazoned on a rock that hangs on the wall in our family room, and it's 4 words. Thou shalt not whine. So if boundaries are non-negotiable, if they're always absolute, then how are we going to account for in our professional lives the need for tolerance? How do we maintain the integrity of the ministerial relationship? How do we always recognize the reality of power and vulnerability being present in our relationships and make choices that sustain healthy boundaries and honor our deep human need to be in intimate relationships?
Joy, can I say something?
Well, of course.
Well, I just want to share this third point on this slide. How do we, in ministry, how do we make choices that sustain healthy boundaries and honor our deep human need to be in intimate friendship relationships? In 2014, I was given 35 minutes to speak to the Council of Bishops. I was a newbie and quite nervous, and so, and still am. And so I wrote to several bishops that I knew well and said, your council's given me 35 minutes to talk about boundaries. And I need to know, of everything that could be said, what is the biggest challenge for you? And I had 4 of 5 bishops in their responses include this third point. How do we make choices that sustain healthy boundaries and honor our deep human need to be in intimate friendship relationships? And so for them, the challenge is most of them are not home. They are appointed in another place they've never lived before. And so it's an entire new world of people. For them, many people think, oh, I can't be a friend to them because they're a bishop. And I'm not there where I can be a friend. And so the isolation that they identified feeling, that they also identified being a red flag that could lead them to some unhealthy ways to feel companioned, was huge for me. And I just simply add to that, I don't think that's unique to bishops. I think that's true in ministry.
So surely you see that in examining our boundaries, we're facing continual paradoxes in our lives in ministry. We are United Methodist, and Lord knows, as United Methodists, we are good at resolutions. There's evidence of that in the United Methodist Social Principles, in the Book of Resolutions, in the Book of Discipline. You got it. You need a resolution or a rule about it. We've got it. In the Social Principles, here in paragraph 161, pertinent to our study this week, sexual assault is wrong. It does not matter what the person is wearing. Did you see evidence of that in the play today? Yes, you did. You think about it. We reject the erroneous notion that one gender is superior to another. Exploitation of power through sexual abuse. Sexual harassment must be understood as an exploitation of a power relationship. How many of you have sat through clergy sexual ethics classes in your annual conferences? Not everybody. Almost everybody. We teach this over and over and over again, and yet it is still true that clergy are experiencing these difficulties. We must take our role in building good community and good relationships seriously, because within ministerial relationships, misconduct is a betrayal of a sacred trust. As Bill Waddell said, when we speak of sexual misconduct, a broad scope of behavior may be included. And we've talked about what some of those things were in the plenary. Sexual misconduct is a violation of our power and vulnerability dynamics by the clergy person, or between two clergy persons, between the male clergy person who is the supervisory one and the female clergy person who is in a junior or associate or a less experienced role. Look at all this. Book of Resolutions. Child abuse, adult sexual abuse, harassment, rape, or sexual assault, sexualized verbal comments or visuals. Poor Portia, I just really gave her a hard time I think she felt like I gave her a hard time in the question and answer, because she sat there uncomfortably texting about sexualized verbal comments. Unwelcome touching and advanced use of sexualized material, stalking, sexual abuse of use, or those without capacity to consent, misuse of the pastoral or ministerial position. So there you go.
Make sure we understand that chargeable offense is laity or clergy.
Becky said, let me make sure you understand that a chargeable offense can be brought against a layperson or a clergy person or a bishop. They're clergy. So, have any of you experienced being involved in in a complaint process against a layperson? I see 2 hands raised, and they're from the same annual conference. Okay, so it's a very unusual thing, but it is possible in our polity. It is possible. Let's go to the next one.
Just a quick point. In our polity, isn't it true that clergy sexual misconduct is one of the few offenses that does not carry a statute of limitations?
I'm sorry?
In our polity, in our book of discipline, isn't it true that clergy sexual misconduct is one of the few offenses that does not carry a statute of limitations?
Not completely. Child abuse, which is included in the definition of sexual misconduct, has no statute of limitations. All others, the incident must have taken place within 6 years prior to the complaint being filed. Again, if that's something you don't agree with and think there should be legislation on, jump on, yeah.
We can work on it. Now, having set the stage this far with this much information from Book of Discipline, Book of Resolutions, Social Principles, I want to introduce a member of our team, Reverend Stephanie Arnold, so she can introduce what's about to come up here on the screen. Just as you were riveted to your seats this morning by the performance, you will be again in just a couple of minutes. I'm just preparing you.
Hi. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I just want to give you a little background on the video you're about to see. So I'm from the North Alabama Conference. I serve in Birmingham, Alabama. And several years ago, I became really, through the help of COSRO, began to have language for some experiences that I had had within my own conference, which involved harassment from another clergy person who had power over me. And throughout that process, we were not able to reach a just resolution because it was the he said, she said that never has the hard enough evidence. And so I was unwilling to sign any kind of just resolution that didn't involve someone agreeing that they had done what I knew they had done. And so therefore I did not sign my name to a confidentiality agreement, which I think is important for you to know because you do not have to sign confidentiality agreements. In the process of that, I felt the only thing in going through that I had left was the power of my voice to tell my own story. So a couple of months after all of that, my local COSRO branch or team asked me if I would be a speaker at our North Alabama conference and COSRO breakfast. They had no idea. I mean, nobody knew what had been going on for me previously that year because we had kept confidential about those things. So when I got asked to speak at this breakfast, there were normally about 30 people who would attend. But in the process of going through that, I had known that there were other women who had had very similar experiences to mine and much worse, some of them with the same individual. And so I began to think, how can I use this opportunity to speak at this breakfast as a way to kind of break the silence that many of us have felt we have to live within. And so my COSRO team allowed us to send a letter out to all the women in our annual conference that we had emails for, inviting them to share with me their stories of sexual harassment, abuse, prejudice, those things, and that those would be kept confidential. So I began to get stories coming in to me. And as I was preparing to write, trying to think through how do we tell these stories in an authentic way, and yet how do we do that in a way that protects people's vulnerability? Because I am still utterly convinced that that very small first layer that we peeled back was only the easiest stories to tell and not the most traumatic. And so it was real important to develop that trust and to not betray anyone or the nature of their story. So I decided that one of the ways to help change the system might be to invite some of my male colleagues to tell the stories of their sisters, and that would in fact actually put them in the seat to now be an advocate, so that they would hopefully never dare perpetuate some of the stories that they were going to share. So we did all of that for that breakfast. Somewhere around 125 people actually ended up coming to the breakfast, and people began to ask afterwards, as they heard about these men telling the stories, did we video it? Did we have a copy of it? To which we didn't, because we never think that far in advance for such a small engagement of what we thought. But then the COSRO team got together and said, was there any way that we could do that again and video it? And I work with a team of people at my church who have some fantastic video skills. And so we kind of took that script and made it for a video and re-asked many of the men to participate. And that has become the #HerTruth video that you're going to see now.
At my church, I and other women on staff are often sexually harassed by male colleagues with dirty jokes. We're asked pointed questions about our sex lives, and I've even had my butt grabbed at a work conference by one of them.
When I accepted a position on staff at a local church, I actually asked to minimize my experience because it could be too threatening for others.
In consultation with my DS, he shared some perceptions that might be out there about me, saying, "We don't want folks thinking, here comes that bitch."
A male colleague said to me, "You must have used your feminine wiles to get your appointment."
I was offered a significant raise by my church when I became the senior pastor, but the bishop at the time had the church reduce my salary by $5,000. The bishop told me it could be bad for my husband's self-esteem if I made so much money, since my husband was clergy as well, and that it might be hard on our marriage.
My senior pastor was asked by the DS why he spoke so well of me. The DS wanted to know, was there something more going on between us that would make him think so highly of me?
A father pulled his daughter from my church's youth group because, he told me, he didn't want her learning witchcraft and how to be a lesbian from me, since I am a female pastor.
During reappointment season, in a triad consultation with district superintendents, I was asked if I had given consideration to whether or not I could manage being a senior pastor and a parent.
While in conversation at a clergy luncheon, I bravely shared that growing up I had been physically abused by a church worker when a male clergy person responded with a laugh that he could understand how I might have driven someone to beat me.
When I first met the senior pastor's wife, she looked me up and down and then said, "I can see why he hired you." If I was given $1 for every time I was told I'm too pretty to be a pastor, I could pay off the church building debt.
When appointed to a downtown tall steeple church, a female attorney said she didn't want me to be her daughter's minister. She said women make good children's ministers and assistants to the pastor, but not youth ministers or real pastors.
I asked for a raise, and my senior pastor said I could not advocate for myself with the Staff Parish Relations Committee. Instead, he said he would ask them for me. And when he did, they were asked to research what to pay me based on what other female clergy made in our conference.
As a seminary student, when visited by the bishop's cabinet, a DS told me that either I or my spouse would have to drop our career or choose a different one, because only men who had teachers or nurses for wives could make it up the ladder.
The United Methodist Church affirms that men and women have equal value. And for more than 60 years, we have sought to offer them equal opportunities in ministry. However, the statements you just heard are real life experiences of women in ministry. In fact, when we asked women to share with us their personal stories of harassment, abuse, and discrimination, we received far more than we could share with you in this video. It can be hard to hear such painful experiences, but it's even harder to experience them. It's frightening to experience abuse, harassment, discrimination. And I can tell you from personal experience, it can leave you feeling vulnerable, isolated, and ashamed. You can even begin to question your own identity. And while the blame for these experiences never falls upon the victim, but instead the perpetrator, we function within a system that can often allow this abuse, harassment, and discrimination to continue unabated if we choose to remain silent about it. Thankfully, there is much we can do to make sure that no woman in ministry ever feels alone or isolated as we validate not only her experiences, but also her incredible worth as a church leader. Perhaps the place to start is to begin to question why things are the way they are. Why are so few clergy women appointed as senior pastors and given the opportunity to lead and preach at large membership churches? If it isn't because there's something in our genetic makeup that makes us less capable of leadership, then why statistically are we offered fewer opportunities than our male counterparts? Why are laywomen so often asked to take the minutes at church leadership meetings? If it isn't because we believe that women have less wisdom, then why through our actions are we asking them to speak less and listen more? And why are so many comments made to women about our appearance? If it isn't because being more attractive makes you better at ministry, then why is it that it's discussed in many ways as if it's an indicator of our excellence? Now, the answers to these questions may not be because we seek to treat women differently or because we value them less, but simply because we're unaware of the powerful impact that our words and actions have upon the value of another human being. Unaware that even though we have words of equality affirmed in our discipline, our actions have not yet caught up. However, being unaware is not the call of a United Methodist. We are called to be aware of our community and to work to continue to help it grow into the kingdom of God. Transformation begins with healing, and healing begins with first acknowledging the injury. Faithfully hearing the stories of our sisters begins the healing process because we cannot mend what we are unaware of to be broken. But let me share a truth with you that I wish wasn't so. Healing often hurts. There is often pain associated with an injury when it begins to heal. Much like how physicians will reset bones so that they may knit back together in healthy and whole ways, we may experience pain as we allow God to reset our words and actions as we strive to live more faithfully regarding the value and the place of women in ministry. Healing comes in community and right relationships. As we stand in solidarity with women and choose to speak out against discrimination, harassment, and abuse, we will begin to heal the brokenness in the world around us and within ourselves, as each of us claim our value as a child of God and our worth as a church leader. Let me say what I hope you already know. Women are an integral part to the life and ministry in our churches. I dare say that without the commitment and service of women, many of our churches would close within a year. Women are as much an image bearer of our Creator as men. And none of us should remain silent or complicit to statements that devalue women we have serving in our churches by saying things like, You know, when it comes to women in our conference, we really only have a few that are truly effective. Or, look, she's our token woman. No, we have many effective female clergy and lay leaders, and our effectiveness has nothing to do with our gender. While we have much to be healed from as a church, we also have much that we can celebrate. On behalf of COSRO, the Commission of the Status and Role of Women, let me say thank you to all of those women who have paved the way. Thank you to those of you whose wounds have often gone unnoticed or unspoken by our conferences, and most painfully by other women. Thank you for your courage and for your strength. Because of you, there are more women who get to be in ministry today. Together, it is our job to continue to pave the way so that each of us feels empowered to achieve our God-given call. All of us are needed. All of us are valued. And while our world may have often struggled with our role, our priorities, and our value, our God never has. Women have a place of prominence within the encounters and healings of Jesus. Not only are they unequivocally the first to witness the resurrection and the first to be called by name to preach the gospel, but they're an integral part to the life and ministry of Jesus. Within an oppressive first-century culture, Jesus elevates the role of women, and he invites his disciples and the church to do likewise. Just think with me over the encounters Jesus has with women. I imagine the woman at the well was really tired of drinking dirty water in the hottest part of the day, isolated from community. And Jesus gives her fresh, living water. I imagine the woman who had been bleeding was really tired of hemorrhaging with no one to stop it. And Jesus heals her. I imagine that Mary was really fed up with her place always needing to be in the kitchen serving others. And Jesus commends her for choosing the better way. And I imagine that Martha longed to be seen as more than just a dutiful sister. And Jesus invites her to be a disciple and to sit at his feet. I imagine the woman who was caught in adultery was tired of being labeled a slut, when the man that she's even said to be with was never condemned. And Jesus says, I don't condemn you. And I imagine the woman who was bent over with a humped back, was tired of bowing down low, never holding her head up high. And Jesus breaks the Sabbath law, lays hands on her, heals her, and sets her free from her heavy load, showing that she has priority over rules and laws. And I imagine the Syrophoenician mother was terrified as her child lay dying, and then humiliated when Jesus called her a dog. Don't you think that she was ready to be seen as more than that? And yet she persisted and persisted. And she never gave up on her deep conviction and belief that yes, she was in fact more than that. And yes, that God of creation made her as more and wants to heal not only her and her child, but also the broken world that refused to see her as more. And we are left with perhaps our only example of Jesus changing his mind, being taught a deeper way of seeing another, beyond their gender, nationality, or status. And in the end, Jesus does all that she asks of him, and he calls her faith great. I read these texts and I see God saying no to women being treated as less than. I read these texts and I see the Son of God undoing what the world has said should be our priorities or our value. I read these texts and I am filled with power and with hope of the Holy Spirit that together we can continue this sacred work and restore all of humanity to its rightful place, full of dignity, capability, and opportunity. We can all be healed and made whole. because that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is the kingdom of God, and that is the work that we are called to do. Choosing to participate in each other's healing allows us to take away the power of our collective injuries. When we heal together, our injuries can no longer do damage. When we choose to heal together, we get to all claim our God-given value. You have a powerful role to play in helping our church become a leader in seeing and treating women equally. Don't let it be said of your congregation that you won't accept a female senior pastor. And certainly don't consider paying her less than you would her male counterpart. Invite lay women to hold roles within your church that exemplify their leadership through trustees, staff parish, finance, and lay service. Make sure your church abides by ministerial integrity training so that it will be a safe place for all. And in the event that abuse, harassment, or discrimination takes place, report it immediately. Expect your annual conference to offer lay women and clergy women equal opportunity to have leadership roles as they do men, and then call them out if they don't. These conversations are hard, and it takes a lot of courage to speak the truth. And yes, healing often hurts. But the pain of not healing our inequality has far greater consequences. It's my prayer that through our growing awareness and advocacy, we will let the one who heals us all guide us into a deeper understanding of the kingdom of God, and each of us having our value and worth within it.
Thank you for listening to these stories, which have been so courageously shared by the women of the North Alabama Conference. Their truth is a powerful narrative that we as a church have much to do to value all people. If you believe that you have experienced harassment, discrimination, or abuse, we want you to know that you are not alone. Support can be found at a confidential hotline, 1-800-523-8390. The Commission on the Status and Role of Women advocates for the full participation of all women in the entire life of the United Methodist Church. And we want to be a resource for you. Resources for small groups and worship can be found at the website www.gcsrw.org. As we continue to raise awareness and advocate for the full inclusion of women, we invite you to tell your story. Please do this on social media with the hashtag #HerTruth. I believe that we can break the stained glass ceiling together.
Part of what I hope that you hear in seeing that and me sharing some with you, just the background before it, is that sometimes even under the best of circumstances with a just resolution or any other process, you don't get the desired outcome that you want. But that doesn't mean that all hope is lost. I have told Becky before and many other people, it took quite a while, but I didn't get the desired outcome that I wanted. I didn't get the outcome that I thought that was best for my annual conference. However, I'm utterly convinced today that I feel more empowered today, and that more good has come out of that in a broader spectrum than had I gotten everything I wanted in that process. And so that to me is the mystery of God that I can't fully explain, and it doesn't, not every situation works out that way, and I know that, but I would just say to anyone in here or to the people that you will meet at one day who have an experience where they have been abused, harassed, or discriminated against, encouraging them to feel empowered and to find their voice. There is a lot that can be done with a single voice, and nobody has the right to silence that or to use confidentiality as a veil to prohibit them from sharing their truth.
So I want you to tell me one word. How are you feeling right now? I know you're awake. What else? Angry. Disappointed. Grateful. Encouraged. Aware. Pardon me? Hopeful. We couldn't have this first session without seeing this after what we saw this morning. So I'm going to move us now to this, and Becky's going to come back to the mic.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. I've watched that video a lot of times, and I sat here just then and I watched it again as if for the first time. And I heard your statement so clear when you said, our words matter. The words we choose to have in our interactions with one another make a difference. And we need to be constantly practicing that self-awareness about how could what I have just said been misinterpreted, and making any possible wrong right. And that's our responsibility to do that. And I would encourage you, as you're going back to your annual conferences and teaching this, that you encourage that kind of thinking among the clergy and laity in your annual conference. That every one of us have the responsibility to practice self-awareness all the time, not just one day every 4 years, not just one day every 4 years thinking about the issue of power and vulnerability, but constantly staying aware of the differentiation in power and vulnerability. You have power. It's that simple. As clergy, you have power. As ministerial leaders, you have power. As a former staff parish chair, I can tell you I had a lot of ministers who said, I don't have any power. Well, yes, you do. I understand there are days you feel like you have none, but you have power. And you would be wise to never, ever forget that. So, as we think about power, I want to pose a few questions to you. And I am a question person. I think we do our best work when we sit and really give intentional attention to some of these questions. And so, as ministers in this room, or as lay people who are in leadership roles, when are you most aware of your power in that role? I'm sorry? In the pulpit. At the communion table. Wow. When I'm teaching. When nobody questions me. Yeah. Being in the know. Having the information. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry? When I'm serving others. When other people name that because you're a minister, you have a better relationship with God than they do. You have a direct line. Yeah. Yeah. I don't. You do. Right. People seeking Yes. People turning to you for guidance or opinion, feedback first before they go anywhere else. And you and I both know this. And I know there's at least one other therapist in the room, but we know this. There are things people will say to their pastors that they won't say to us. You know, you work with a domestic violence victim and go back to the shelter for the next appointment and be told, oh, she left that afternoon and went back home. And have the minister meet and the minister say, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to take this. And they have the word that propels them to be able to make some changes in their life. You have power. You have power. So when I walk in my little church, in my little neighborhood in Chicago on a Sunday morning, I walk in with this posture. You have something in here that I need. And that's why I pulled on snow boots that I've never owned before in my life. And I walked to church because for the first time in 40 years I don't own a car. And on my own free will I walked in here because you have something I think I need. And I think I can get it in here. Well, when I walk in that door, people, I walk in set up to be helped or to be hurt. And when you step into that pulpit, Sally, you stand in that pulpit with the opportunity to help or to hurt. And so just remember that this power influence has everything in the world to do with how easy it is to go from being a caregiver to an oppressor. Fast. Fast. Okay, I probably should look at these notes now. Okay. So when do you feel powerless in your position of ministry? Appointment season, especially if you ask to be moved. Mm-hmm. When you're an associate and your senior pastor overrules you. When the problem is so great that it's pretty clear to you that your hope and your answer is with God, and you wish there was something more you could do. Yeah. It's a helpless feeling too, isn't it? Yeah. Go ahead.
I just think especially when you are pushing back darkness that you are afraid to show weakness.
Are afraid? So those times when you're pushing back darkness and are afraid to show weakness, that vulnerability. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel powerless anytime a gentleman in my congregation wants to introduce me to somebody else, and they feel the need to put their arm around me on my waist, or to comment on my appearance when they're introducing me, or to say something about that. You know, particularly being in the South, you're expected to be nice
Mm-hmm.
and to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that moment, even though I don't like what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
I feel powerless to
Mm-hmm.
do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think about the skit this morning when Portia was asked, why didn't you confront them? And it's that, sometimes you find yourself in those positions where you don't like it, but you're weighing what is the repercussion going to be if I step out and name this with people. So yeah, Stephanie was saying those times when she's being introduced, especially by men in her congregation, to someone else, and during the introduction they feel the need to put their arm around her shoulders or around her waist or comment on her looks as they are introducing her. that a powerlessness of, I don't feel like I can do or say anything to this, because what is this going to mean for me? And I'll just say, being from Mississippi, we get to say this because we know this, and it's not necessarily limited to that area of the world, but I can tell you, establishing boundaries can easily be interpreted as rudeness. And that is not a way that children are often socialized to establish boundaries, because that's being rude to the neighbor or whomever. Okay, somebody else had their hand. Yes.
I frequently get introduced as a clergy person, and the people in the audience tell me that I don't look like I don't look like that.
So, okay. So when she is introduced as a pastor, but then receives comments from people in the area that she's being introduced to that she doesn't look like a pastor, a feeling of powerlessness on what do I do with this information? How do I would think maybe even a feeling of wanting to defend, but I am. Yeah. You had.
I was going to say, what you say is on their mind, because the people, because they're looking at the content of what you try to communicate, so they're looking at you as who you are. Instead of being rooms that could be ethnicity, it could be where you come from.
Right.
You really value by what they're looking for.
Yes, yes. Judging that book by its cover, and undermining and demeaning what you are saying as a result of doing that. Yeah. Yes.
Walking into the pastor parish committee on your first introduction, and the chairperson says, well, we'll accept you, but we didn't ask for a woman. And the district superintendent sat there and said nothing.
And the district superintendent did what?
Sat there and did nothing.
To not speak is to speak. Yeah. Yeah. So, you just, it's as Bishop Snazy said this morning, I really thought we would be further along. I thought we would be further along right now. Yeah. Somebody over in that corner had their hand up.
I feel powerless after this is my second legal harm.
Yes.
And I am certified with Faith Trust Institute on 2 different levels. And I'm on my 4th bishop trying to tell them what we need to do as a denomination. I'm a member of the AV Church, and I keep hearing from bishops, presiding elders, female clergy, male clergy, everybody, that sounds real good, and don't call us real funny. I feel that. And I have my doctoral research on clergy sexual misconduct in the African Methodist Church. And one of the times that I did write an article for the church denominational newspaper, they forgot me.
I don't really even have words to respond to that. I mean, the disregard is the word that's in my head. The disregard and obviously disrespect for the gift that you have. Yeah. Make sure you talk to one of us before you leave. Again, huh? Somebody else. One more. Let's take one more. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So there very clearly, you have power, and very clearly times you feel very powerless. In each of these circumstances, how is the power threatening? How was it beneficial to you? Did I skip something? Okay. 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 How was the power? How is the power? How was the power threatening to you when Staff Parish said, "You're here, we see you, but don't think this is what we've asked for"?
It was threatening. I was there for 5 years.
Wow.
And how was it beneficial? I developed backbone.
You developed what?
Backbone.
Backbone. Mm-hmm. Wow.
I was in the same situation, and the DS allowed the staff parish to vote if they were going to accept me.
Wow. So you had been appointed. You were there for your first covenant meeting or whatever that's called now, and the DS, and there was maybe some pushback about we didn't ask for a female clergy person, and the DS allowed the staff parish to take a vote on whether you would stay or not.
And I stayed 5 years also.
Wow.
And I also felt empowered.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to say to both of you and all the rest of you in this room, just write this stuff down so I can read it and learn from you. I'm just in awe of your tenacity and your willingness to do that. I would say I wouldn't last. I'd just go bye-bye. Somebody, yes, you had your hand up.
In my current appointment, in the introductory meeting with the Staff Pastor Service Relationship Committee, one of the members of the SPRC commented, "Finally, we have a male pastor." I felt offended and challenged. And I've been spending a lot of time affirming the work of the previous pastors in that congregation who are female.
Yes.
And it has been an uphill track.
Yeah.
I'm battling against culture, as Bishop Snacey defined it more.
Yeah.
It's a church culture that is really, really deep and profound. Thank God I have the support of a strong women leader in the church.
Wow. Yeah. And I listen to you share that example, and I'm immediately reminded of what I hear as I travel around the denomination offering trainings or in meetings or whatever. And so often I'm hearing leadership say to me, "You know, Becky, what our problem is within the culture of our church, we have lost the ability to interact with one another in a way that is respectful, that is from a place of integrity and deeply honoring one another in our interactions with one another." Yeah. Okay, I've already said that one. The second point on here, as soon as I read that, I hear the voices in my head of people that I listen to across the world who have filed a complaint or who are thinking of filing a complaint and have already received a response that says, this is just the way we do this. Or this is just the way she has always been, or this is just the way he has always been. And then I think about my recent totally unplanned and amazing trip that I had the opportunity to do with the West. I tagged on, I just hitched a ride with the West Ohio team. I had never met any of them. Well, I'd met D. Stickley Minor one time, and I just got on their little wagon and we went to North Katanga at the invitation of Bishop Monday. And the reason I was invited is Bishop Monday wanted me to talk about boundaries and power differentiation within the culture of the Methodist Church in North Katanga. Well, I can tell you it is a powerful culture of patriarchy. And a lot of children don't get to go to school, and if there's a choice, the boy gets to go to school before the girl. And Dr. Betty is here as one of our participants from Central Conferences. We have 10 people from Central Conferences here at Do No Harm, North Katanga, South Congo, Mozambique, and 3 people from the Philippines. Yeah. So, and she is a woman who has dealt with a lot of pushback, I think, in rising in leadership in the conference. And yet she just says, and I'm going ahead. And I'm going ahead. And I guess what I want you to hear from me in this is that when I see an African bishop willing to stand up and say, I want every woman at this pastor school to have the opportunity to meet alone with Becky and other women, to talk about the challenges of being a woman in the church and society. It gives me so much hope. And I come back and say, if he can do that there, we can do that here. Because he's making a lot of, I think, unpopular decisions among some people. And yet he's still making them. Because he's saying, this is not going to be a reason for a lack of ministerial and ethical integrity. And that's what we're asking you to incorporate in this teaching of boundaries. How will you get this message across to the people that you will be training in the name of integrity in ministry and healthy boundaries? How will you get this across that we can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it and see a change?
Before we change that slide, I want to say another story related to the second point there. In maybe the second conversation I ever had with Columba, he's back there, we were talking about developing safe sanctuary resources for use in the Central Conferences, especially in that conversation in the Congo. And I said, well, I'm happy to help GBGM and our task force and everything develop those resources. But I need to know a whole lot more about the culture than I know, because I've never lived there. I'm a lawyer, I'm a reverend, I'm half a clergy couple, and I'm the author of Safe Sanctuaries, but I've never lived in the Congo. And I'm not a lawyer in the Congo. And so I said to him, in order for me to be effective in helping, I would need to understand a whole lot more about the laws as well as the culture. And his reply to me changed my way of thinking about this. He said, Joy, I understand what you mean, but child abuse is always wrong. It may not be illegal, in certain definitions or in certain geographies. But in the gospel, it is always wrong. And I will never forget that. Because that attitude, that right thinking, is exactly on point when it comes to clergy sexual misconduct, whether the victims are children or adults. It is always wrong. And we are called to change it, to develop ministerial and ethical integrity wherever we are being. Power is relational. In the very first clergy ethics class I ever taught, and that would have been in 1993 in Atlanta, Georgia, my teaching partner and I caught a district superintendent off guard because the district superintendent was a woman, and we called her up to the front to be the focus of a hypothetical in which she had a male clergy person who came in to her office during appointment making season, and he tried to use his masculine wiles to persuade her to make his appointment the way he wanted it to be made. And so she was caught off guard by that. But it illustrated that between clergy persons, there is a relationship of power, and it changes depending on gender, circumstances, geography. Clergy couple, how many of you in here are half of a clergy couple? Many of us. I'm half of a clergy couple. I have served in a local church with my husband, both of us on staff in the same church. And since that time, I have not done that. And it's been really good. So I have served as a staff person in the same church with my husband, and I have served as a clergy spouse in the church that he's in his 24th year now serving. So clergy couples face dynamics that change up and down, side to side, you name it. Clergy and laity staff, laity members to clergy to laity. Do you see how those different categories change your power and your resources as they change? How many of you who are in clergy couples have ever slapped a parishioner? Physically. So I'll confess, I've only been pregnant one time in my life. I was pregnant with our daughter, who's a grown woman now, and I'm an extreme introvert on Myers-Briggs. I mean extreme. Every question that decides whether you're an I or an E, I'm an I. And so being pregnant and being in a very public role like that was a little bit weird. And one Sunday morning, a parishioner walked up to me and started to reach for my pregnant belly, which wasn't all that big. I only gained 17 pounds total. He wanted to pat my baby, he said. I was offended by that. And before I could think, I slapped his hand away. So that was the one and only time I ever stood close enough to a parishioner during my pregnancy to be touched. I never let myself make that mistake again. Power shifts. It's relational. You can think of other examples. I was mortified after I had done it, thinking, oh my gosh, what if he goes to Staff Parish? We're both employed at the same church, and we could both lose our jobs, and I'm 6 weeks away from giving birth. I was mortified, frightened. You can relate to that. And so, power is relational depending upon your place, your circumstances, your role, and those around you. But integrity is integrity is integrity. So we're going to take a break.